so your discretion is advised. So, has anyone here ever driven on the freeway, for those who have a license, of course, and let me know on the side someone broke down, but you didn't help them because either A, you were afraid, or you were scared to help out a total stranger, or B, you already thought that they already called for help, they already called a AAA guy. So has anyone ever seen that happen and you didn't do anything? Well, there's a term in psychology called diffusion of responsibility. And it kind of encompasses that whole, situation. Like, for example, if you're in the middle of a crowd and someone has a seizure or something and no one helps them, it's because they're in an environment with a lot of people and they think that, oh, it's probably nothing serious because no one's doing anything about it, right? So when I look at history, especially the Holocaust, and I see pictures such as this one and the atrocities that the Jewish people face, I think, well, wasn't there anyone there to stand up for what they believed in? I'm pretty sure that not everyone there thought that this was correct. So I see these pictures and I think that how can mankind let this happen? How can they allow this to happen? Which leads us to our theme, desensitization and demoralization. We looked up the specific meanings and definitions for both of these words, and the first one is desensitization. Can everyone pronounce it with me on count of 3? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Desensitization. Okay. Now that we got that off our chest, it is to make emotionally insensitive or unresponsive, as by prolonged exposure or repeated shock. The second word is demoralization, which is so much easier to pronounce. It is to debase the morals of or corrupt. The Holocaust took place from 1933 to 1945, and during that time period, the Jewish people faced torturous acts by the Nazis, and they treated the Jews with brutal circumstances. And there were sinister actions that took place during that time period, such as Sodom Commandant, or, for example, let's say that me and Mirabel are Jewish inmates in a concentration camp, such as, like Auschwitz or Buchenwald, and let's say that she dies. Not me, but her, right? Let's say that she passes away, and the Nazis make me dispose of her body. And this is usually after a person dies from gas chambers, right? And that's called Sodom Commandant. Another torturous act that occurred during the Holocaust is psychological music that was utilized as a psychological torture. For example, imagine if you're a Jewish inmate that is walking to your camp, right? So concentration camp, and you think, well, this is the end of it. I'm walking into the death zone. I'm walking into my final days. And can you imagine hearing upbeat music in the background by an orchestra, and you're thinking in your mind, I'm going to die, and I hear this. It was utilized as a weapon of misery for the Jews. And the next one is a more obvious one, starvation. So basically, the Nazis gave the Jews little to no rations for everyday life, and that would cause them to starve to death. And the last one is the dark cells, and the gas chambers. They would place the Jewish inmates into dark cells, and these cells usually had a lack of oxygen, which would cause suffocation and death. And the most notorious one over all of them is the gas chambers. This is the more obvious one that people know about. They would place the Jews or tell them to go into a room, and the Jewish people thought that, we're just taking a shower. It's probably just a shower. They would just, in their mind, they would erase all possibilities of this is my death, right? So the gas chambers, obviously, they were gassed in as little as 5 minutes, and they would die from that. One of the most unethical acts that I think that the Jewish people faced is medical experimentation. And the Nazis had specific reasons in which they did this. They did this to ease the survival of Axis military personnel. So, for example, they would test on the Jews. So they would put them into a tub filled with ice and see how long they would survive in the ice. And they did this to find effective treatment for hypothermia. And they also created and experimented with pharmaceuticals to get data to make better treatments for injuries and illnesses. And the last major aspect on why they did this was to advance the racial and ideological principles of a Nazi worldview. And these are just examples of what the Jewish people faced during that time period. For example, these 4 kids here were starved. Susie. And this is a preserved head that is in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And this is just Nazi doctors that are experimenting on a Jewish man.
Now, an example of someone who actually survived the Holocaust and lived on to tell the story is Elie Wiesel. And he is this guy right over here. Now, Elie Wiesel, he has written many well-known stories about his time during the Holocaust. But one of the most well-known stories would be Night. And Night basically talks about his experience during the Holocaust when he was an adolescent. He was like mine and Jan's age. So this book was first published in the year 1955, and it also won the Nobel Peace Prize, and it is a trilogy, Night, Dawn, and Day, but during our English class we had only read Night, and notice how it begins with night instead of day. Now, Elie Wiesel, unfortunately, during the Holocaust, he had lost his parents, his sisters, and even his grandparents. And during the whole story, the whole novel, you can tell that he was suffering through internal conflicts, and one of the main ones was religion. He studied Jewish religion such as Yiddish, Kabbalah, and Talmud. And over the novel, you can tell that Elie was struggling with his religion. He was beginning to lose his faith. And of course, you're going through something as terrible as the Holocaust. It's very understandable to question whether or not God is real or whoever it is that you believe in. So Elie, he did survive the Holocaust, and today he is still alive. He is 85 years old, and he has one child named Shlomo, whom he named after his mother. And of course, in a memoir of the Holocaust, there are several instances of desensitization. And here are some examples, and these examples are mainly directed towards Elie as a person, not rather than the Jews in general. So the climax of proof of desensitization in Night was when Elie talks about how the infants were thrown up into the air and they were used as target practice. Take a moment to picture that in your head. There was also a ceremony when people were being hanged at the gallows, and Elie couldn't think of anything but his hunger. And there was also this Jewish tradition, this Jewish holiday, when traditionally the Jews, they would fast, they wouldn't eat. But these Jews, they're already being starved to death, and they're so hungry, but some of these Jews, their faith was so strong that they did fast. But Elie, purposely, he did not fast. And this is when, in the story, he begins to rebel. So, going on in the story, Elie, he gets hospitalized, and his neighbor actually told him, "I have more faith in Hitler than in anyone else. He alone has kept his promise, all his promises to the Jewish people." And towards the closing of the book, Elie's father, he passed away, unfortunately, but Elie, he didn't even shed a single tear.
So fast forwarding to the end of the Holocaust, like a decade after, is a man that faced many inhumane conditions along with other migrant workers, and this man is named Cesar Chavez. He was a farm worker, and he faced wretched migrant camps in which they had very horrific working conditions. So these working conditions included, like, they didn't have water for working long hours a day. Imagine working in the hot sun and you have no water. They didn't provide any bathrooms. And also, they got meager wages. So, meaning that they worked so hard, but the wages that they got were insufficient for what they deserved. they also face a lot of discrimination. And I'm sure that everyone here has faced some sort of discrimination in their lives. So fortunately, he said that, you know what, I can't stand this. This is not right. This should not be happening to us. We're humans too. You guys are not the only ones that have rights to live peacefully. So he led marches called boycotts and went on several hunger strikes to let the nation know and let his word go out that this is not right. And in 1962, he founded the National Farm Workers Association.
Now let's fast forward to desensitization and demoralization in modern day. What about here in Brainworks? So Jen and I have come up with this math problem, and I promise you all this is a fun math problem. And the question is, how can we maximize demoralization and humiliation in our pranks involving Mr. Welsh? Alright, so we have come up with all of these variables and constraints. It's not based on facts or anything. This is all our personal opinions. So we have two variables, x and y, x being the number of long-term pranks, y being the number of short-term pranks. And for our constraints, we have time, people, preference, and idiot. Okay, so for our time constraint, we believe that it takes about 7 days, a week long, to complete a long-term prank, 1 day to complete a short-term prank, and we want that less than or equal to 180 days in a school year. For the people constraint, we want about 7 people to be in on our long-term prank, 3 people to be in on our short-term prank, and we want that to be less than or equal to 30 people, and that is including Jan and myself. For our preference, we like long-term pranks over short-term pranks because we find them to be much more fun. And for our idiot constraints, that just basically means that we want long-term pranks and our short-term pranks to be greater than or equal to 0 because we can't have negative pranks. So for maximization, how we determined this is that we scaled it on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the most humiliation in Mr. Welsh. So we believe that a long-term prank is about an 8, a short-term prank to be about a 5. So here is our combinations table. Right here, all of these combinations are the possibilities for short-term and long-term pranks. For our x and y's, I'll show you just in a second how we solve for those. And to check if it's feasible, we just plug them into all of the constraints and see if they work. As you can see here, the first 4, they violate some constraints, so we weren't able to use those. And the last 3, they do work, but they're all zeros, so we can't use those. So all that we have left is combination 2 and 3 and combination 2 and 5. We plug it into our maximization. 34.32 is what we got for combination 2 and 5, and 39 for combination 2 and 3. And combination 2 and 3 would be our best bet since it is higher than this problem. So here are some ways that we have solved for our x and y's. Elimination is one method that we use. Here's an example of how we did that. For combination 1 and 2, we use elimination. So what I did, you can add or subtract, but right here I chose to subtract. So 180 minus 30 is 150. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. 7 and 7 will cancel out. So then after that, you would divide both sides by negative 2 in order to cancel out the y. So y equals negative 75. So then after that, you would plug into the y into any combination that you choose. And I chose the first one, and then you break it down from there. So that got me x equals 36.43. Another method that we use is matrices. Here's an example of that. Combinations 2 and 4 is what I used. So basically, right here, the first row, this would be x and y. And that, as you can see there, that's 7 and 3. And then for this fourth combination, x and y, as you can see, there's no y there, so that would be a 0 in the y's place. You multiply that by your variables, and then your answer matrix, 30 and 0. After that, you would take the inverse of your equation matrix, and then you multiply that by your answer matrix. You plug that into the calculator, and that will equal x equals 0, 10, y equals 10. So for our results, we found out that Jan and Maribel should complete 3 long-term pranks and 3 short-term pranks in order to maximize demoralization and humiliation in Mr. Welsh.
So right now, I want to do a group activity involves a series of questions. So
Not with you.
Oh, you guys. Does anyone in the audience want to volunteer?
Oh, we only have one.
We only have one.
Lacey.
Okay, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, in which of course you have to answer them. first one is if you had a clear shot of Adolf Hitler, you know what he did, obviously, right? So if you had a clear shot of Adolf Hitler, would you shoot him knowing what he has done? And remember, there are no consequences, meaning that you will not get in trouble for any actions that you have taken. Yes? Okay, moving on. Second question. Okay. The second question is, going back to when Mrs. Hitler was pregnant with Adolf, in her womb, would you shoot her, killing both her and the baby? But he's unborn, so...
But yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Aha!
You are desensitized.
So we did this to kind of show how wording and how wording can affect your answers and how we can manipulate what you're going to say. So, good job. Well, since I was talking about Mrs. Hitler and you know how she was pregnant, it's a very sensitive topic. Many individuals have different opinions on this. Usually, on the first question, people say yes, and we're dealing with an adult, Adolf Hitler. And with the second question, they usually say no, because of course, you're killing both him and his mother. Well, there's this famous debate that is ongoing now, which is pro-life versus pro-choice, which translates to maternal rights versus fetal rights, / women's rights versus babies' rights. And questions to consider when you're dealing with something sensitive like abortion and looking at both sides of the topic is, when does life begin? Can we assume that the fetus is alive once the brain and the heart is going? How do we currently pronounce humans dead? And is the opposite way of how we pronounce them dead the way that we say they're alive, right? Okay. So the first question, so when does life begin, scientifically speaking? There are two sides to this concept or idea, and the first one is life begins in conception. And this is when the sperm penetrates the ovum.
That sounds painful.
But you wouldn't know. And wouldn't know that. But then there's fertilization, which is a combination of 46 chromosomes, 23 from the mother, 23 from the father, and it creates a zygote. And I will be further explaining it. So humans, so male and female, have reproductive cells called gametes, and these gametes have only 1/2 of the chromosomes that are in diploids, which are non-reproductive cells, and they have 46 chromosomes. And diploid is abbreviated right here as 2N and haploid as N. And when a haploid ovum and a haploid sperm unite through fertilization, they create a diploid zygote. And this is shown through the process here, and that, folks, is how a baby's made. And on the other side of the story, the other side of the debate, people believe that a human life is during week 5 of pregnancy, which is when the embryonic period begins. This is the 5th week of pregnancy or the 3rd week after conception. And this is when the baby's heart, their brain, and other organs begin to form. So, determining the death of human beings, I was actually surprised when I was researching this. So, doctors pronounce only 1% pronounce a person dead, brain dead, only 1% or less of the time, and versus cardiac death, which is 99% of the time. And brain death is determined by unresponsiveness of an individual, absence of reflexes, and apnea. Versus cardiac death, this is when the heart no longer beats and is unable to provide blood to the brain and the rest of the body. And I'll just leave this question with you guys. So it's the opposite of the way we pronounce humans dead, the way we pronounce them alive. And Mirabel and I actually did action research in which we went out to a community and asked individuals their opinion on pro-life versus death by a series of questions. So I hope you guys enjoy.
subject. And actually, yes, I do.
My position on that is strictly the Bible, and God is the giver of life. And so, being that He's the giver, He's the taker, we never have that privilege or responsibility that way.
Yes, I do believe in their right because it's in their body and it's their life, so I think that they can choose whether they can or not.
Okay.
Malcolm is right. Life is given to us by God and not by man. We just have we shouldn't have power over it. We should survive. We should die. The doctor should try to save both businesses. The woman, my dad, the child, God should be the one in charge of that, and the doctor should try to save both people.
Do I believe in a woman's right to choose? What's my personal belief, or what do I think people should be able to do? It's interesting. I don't believe that a woman should be able to abort a fetus because it's a living creature. Human. Just kidding. But no, I don't think that a woman should be able to do that. Yes.
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 I didn't know you were going to answer.
The answer to that is never.
You got raped.
It's still developing and it hasn't reached 6 months yet.
Never. I guess it's not okay to go fix the baby, but he has.
Pretty comfortable.
Well, of course, a little bit uncomfortable, only because I know how many situations can come up in someone's mind. But my comfort, my confidence is strictly in the Bible. I don't rely on my feelings. There's where people go wrong. They start going on their interpretation of the situation, their feeling, their worldview becomes skewed by whatever's going on in society. Christian settles their decision on the Bible.
I'm pretty used to those questions just because it happens in everyday life.
It's sad at the direction our society is taken to simply not care about life as it should be.
Maybe visual. That's it.
I felt bad. At first I was like, yeah, it was like, do whatever you want with your uterus. But then it says it's something you just I felt bad. I don't know. There's questions.
Okay, so we hope you guys enjoyed that. Well, as you can see from our presentation, there were different individuals which would call for varying opinions. Well, as our society evolves today, in our world, there's still things that, diminish. But I think that desensitization and generalization can still be seen no matter what. It still occurs. And it might sound silly, but I did a project in this Steve's class in which this is why I chose the theme to be desensitization. And we did a picture collage in which we were supposed to choose a theme from the book Night, which is by Elie Wiesel. And I chose the theme of desensitization because I thought it was interesting when I, flip through magazines and I see models and they all have emotionless faces. So I think that's kind of like a desensitization in our society. So this is what it looks like, and this is all from different magazines. Oh yeah, and on the back I actually explain the aspects of it. And we often blame society for things that we don't like. For example, there's skinny girls now that are on magazine covers, and sometimes they see that as perfection. Well, I'm going to be biased. I don't see that as perfection. But we blame society, but we are society. So this year, I chose to be the change that I want to see in the world. I joined the leadership team, Bolt, and got involved with community service and overall to make a difference in the school. And Maribel, I also convinced her to join next year. So that's great. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our presentation, and these are just the references that we use, so you can go and check it out if you want to have our presentation. And we want to make some acknowledgements. Well, first I want to thank God for giving this opportunity to me and Maribel to work together, and also my parents. My dad's not here, my mom's here. And my parents and Missy, she's like Wonder Woman of Brainworks.
And Ms. Johnson for answering all my endless amount of questions.
Yeah, and you know that font for ants right there?
Yeah, the tiny little thing right there.
Yeah.
That is dehumanization.
Perfect example.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. But we love you guys, and we thank you for putting up with our pranks and stuff.
And Ms. Donahue for being here to support us, being on the panel. And Ms. Stacy Jones for helping us with that.
She's our accomplice with our pranks. And I also want to thank the panel members and the audience. Thank you, Lacey, for volunteering, and we hope that you enjoyed our presentation. Thank you.
Donnie, you want to start us off?
Sure. Despite the fact that you covered a very heavy and deep topic, it was a rather upbeat and pleasant presentation. That part is phenomenal.
Hi.
That was phenomenal. I did like that you talked about, you did mention Cesar Chavez in your presentation, and I was just curious, how do you see what happened with the farm workers and the Cesar Chavez movement? How did you see that working in with your desensitization and
Well, our
demoralization
theme
thing?
was, so demoralization. Well, I think that since he faced inhumane conditions, that's demoralization. You pretty much are telling him that, oh, you're not good enough for us to give you fair
Okay,
circumstances in life. So I thought that was a great connection.
okay, thank you for clarifying that.
I think you did a great job with your math. For one, your math was spot on. You had everything done very well. Really like, Maribel, how you took the time to not just showcase that combination table, but to sort of explain a little bit of the meaning behind it, so that way people who aren't familiar with that, that's not like a standard math technique. That's just the Miss Johnson organization tool that I've taught you guys. So I like the fact that you had that table in there and explained a little bit about, okay, so these ones don't really matter to us, these ones violated the constraints, and you went through that process really well. And it was entertaining. Math is typically, a lot of people, I hate trying to come up with something, but you made yours entertaining so that everybody was, even if they didn't understand the math, they were curious to know, all right, what's the best way to demoralize Mr. Welch over there? So that was really entertaining and well done. So good job.
Your teachers may not be able to say it, but sitting on the panel all week so far, this is by far the best presentation I've seen. And one of the best I've seen in over the years I've been doing this. It was entertaining, it was very informative, and extremely well done, both of you. You shared it beautifully, you handed off different aspects of the presentation perfectly, so you didn't feel that one person was overwhelming the presentation over the other. It obviously shows you guys have rehearsed and put in the time and effort on it, and the way and quality you presented this is very, very hard skill to master that you guys have done. It was very entertaining. So, good job.
The girls did a very good job. Ms. Johnson pointed out that you made the math entertaining, math was not essential. And sort of some of the others that I've seen, I could follow on a little bit. I get a little lost. Yours made it interesting enough to where I was able to hold on to it. You know your subject, Jen. You were going on in the first part of it and referencing your slides just a little bit, but you mentioned the death cancer of Auschwitz and Birkenau. You would have that anywhere. You have the knowledge in your head, you're able to give to everybody. And I'm really impressed with that. And I also like that you stumbled on the word desensitizing. I like the fact you stumbled on it, but brought everybody into it to let them know, yeah, this is a tough word. And so everybody kind of went, oh, okay, she's going to have trouble because I have trouble. So you did very good.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I'm really into psychology, so I so I thought that was really interesting. And you covered like she said, you covered a bunch of information, but your transitions were smooth and it didn't seem overwhelming, and it was definitely not boring. So that was great.
The reason why we teamed up because we really like psychology, we share that bond. So
Yeah, it was interesting. And I like how you related the abortion to how do you pronounce a human head, and then is it the same? I thought it was really interesting for me, and I like the rewording of the questions and how that makes a difference. It's fun how that's true.
There's one thing I really like about this presentation is we've had a number of students do presentations on abortion, and they handle it in a way that the audience reacts to it, and with negative emotions or different things like that. But what critical thinking should do, because we're a critical thinking academy, is it should be able to break it down and expose both sides and present it in a way, and I haven't heard any panel members take offense to anything you guys said, because you presented their side of the story, which no matter where we fall on the panel, we felt one side presented equally to the other side. And so that allows those negative emotions to not come out, because we're thinking critically about both sides of the issue, versus a lot of society that just kind of doesn't do that. And so that's one thing that I really hope for all of our students, is that we don't go with the majority, which is usually the path of least resistance, and always keep in this safe bubble of topics, but we venture out into those topics that are uncomfortable, tackle them head on, and look at both sides of the issue and present the evidence, which our society should be doing if we're not following the majority like lemmings, you know? So I think you guys do that very well, and I want to applaud you, because you're one of the first groups that I think has done that correctly.
Yeah, no, I concur with Mr. Welsh. It's a tough topic to handle in a way that you're not going to rub some of those emotionally, but I think you did a really good job of presenting perspectives and how word choice can dramatically affect one way or the other, and even how both sides of the issue tend to pose questions in order to get specific reactions from people. And I concur with Mr. Welsh said about critical thinking. The content was great. We covered Holocaust, really talking about some of the processes that took place within the camps. So it wasn't just as simple as mass murder, which was definitely going to happen, but there was a whole process there where dehumanizing the victims of the Holocaust was very much a part of this overall process that the Nazis had planned out and executed. The one thing I would say is with your research, so you did a lot of interviews, and if you get into, I mean, this is a defensive mastery within your high school, so it's fine. But if you get into the college level and the graduate level, you're going to be having to do similar types of research. Say you go out and do interviews. Usually there's a whole consent process. You know, I'm going to air your interview, or I'm going to report what you said. So there has to be a whole pre-trial where you actually tell the questions that are going to be asked, you have them sign consent to use your information. And so what I would challenge you is to start to challenge yourself a little bit. So if you do stuff like this in the future, really approach it from that real research perspective to give it legitimacy, where you're doing this type of informed consent and really trying to get a non-biased or legit perspective.
that's the objective.
No, it wasn't the objectivity, and I'm not knocking it. It was a great presentation. I'm not down by it. For Brammer's defense mastery, it was great. What I'm saying though is you're at that point now where you guys can think deeper research, right? And really look into how do you do real research and how do you publicize the results so that they can be looked at from the educational community as legit. And that's what I was like. That was a really, really good job.
I found it interesting that music was used as a tool of terror. I didn't get that. And hearing that made me think I'm going to reanalyze the scene where Julia Chris's violin is being trampled to death and how you replace that, because I think it's meant to be something other different than what I had originally thought. Yeah. Because he does mention music quite often in that book, and I had a different interpretation of it, so I'm going to go back and look at it again. My one thing is Mary will slow down a little bit. You started to talk really quickly, like, wait, I just got to see that slide and we switched it again. So just try to slow down a little bit. I know it's probably yours. I would have really liked, you had so many examples of desensitization in the novel. If you would have just stopped after, not all of them, because like 6 or 7, but maybe like 2 or 3. This is an example because you just kind of said it as I moved on to the next one, and for those people who didn't haven't read the memoir, it doesn't, they aren't able to